The year is 1177. Photo this for a second. You are standing with 500 exhausted knights, your horses foaming on the mouth after a pressured march that must have killed half of them. The November solar beats down unnaturally hot for overdue autumn, turning your armor into a personal furnace. Your scouts have simply again, with information that makes grown guys weep. Now not 20,000 enemies as you feared. 26,000 of Islam's finest warriors spread across the horizon like a plague of locusts. That is 52 enemies. For each one in all your brothers. The mathematics of annihilation are simple, brutal, and very last. But in 2 hours, 20,000 of those warriors may be dead. The maximum effective Muslim military assembled, because the first campaign will quit to exist. A demised teenage boy with bandaged palms will reap what seasoned commanders referred to as not possible. What military science stated couldn't occur. What even God appeared to have forbidden. Consider the one's numbers again. 500 in opposition to 26,000. The fate of Christian civilization in the Holy Land, possibly. In Europe itself, hangs by using a thread so thin it's invisible. By means of sundown, that thread will become an iron chain. I'm about to expose 3 matters that will change the way you see medieval warfare forever. First, the tactical mistakes Saladin made that no historian expected. Second, why elite warriors who'd in no way acknowledged defeat fled on racing camels. 33, the instant when first Earl Baldwin of IV, a leper king who couldn't sense his personal palms, raised a sword that shouldn't were viable for him to grip and modified history. However, here's what the chronicles do not inform you approximately that morning. First Earl Baldwin of IV wasn't imagined to be alive, a whole lot much less leading in military. Leprosy had been eating away at his frame on the grounds that adolescence. By means of 16, his hands have been so broken they had to be wrapped in silk bandages just to save you them from falling aside. His face hidden in the back of a silver mask, hid features so ravaged that courtiers couldn't observe them without flinching. Physicians had given him months to live 3 years. In the past, each morning he awoke turned into a medical impossibility. Every time he set up a horse, become an act of will that confounded physical fact. Going through him stood Saladin, the sword of Islam, a man who had united the fractured Muslim world through an aggregate of military genius and true piety. At 40, he commanded an empire stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates. His treasury held the wealth of Egypt. His armies had beaten each Christian force dispatched towards them. His popularity on my own had brought about complete garrisons to surrender, without firing an unmarried arrow. While Baldwin fought his personal decaying flesh, Saladin commanded over 100,000 warriors throughout his territories. The power dynamic wasn't just lopsided. It became laughable. Jerusalem itself became preparing for the siege. Ships waited inside the harbors of, and loaded with the possessions of nobles who knew what was coming. Mystery negotiations had been already with Muslim commanders, approximately the terms of surrender. The smart money stated the dominion of Jerusalem had weeks, maybe days. The full Crusader forces across all their territories may want to muster possibly 15,000 men, scattered throughout dozens of castles and towns. Saladin's cutting-edge army on my own, this pressure of 26,000, become almost double the whole lot the Christians ought to theoretically field. And this wasn't even his fundamental force. Here's the fact that November morning, first Earl Baldwin of May want to scrape together best 500 knights, inclusive of simply 80 Knights Templar. The one's warrior who took vows to never retreat, by no means give up, in no way show mercy to Islam's armies. Helping them had been slightly 3000 infantry, many of them nearby Levi's armed with little extra than farm gear and determined braveness. In opposition to them, Saladin had brought 8,000 elite cavalry, slave soldiers trained from early life to be best killing machines. However, as autumn grew to become to iciness in 1177, intelligence reports introduced news that would pressure the dying king to try the not possible. Enter Jerusalem's throne room, The Warfare Council had devolved into slightly managed. Panic. Stanley Baldwin, the force, needed to be carried in on a clutter, his legs no longer capable of assist even his faded weight. The November bloodless that need to have supplied relief, alternatively dispatched spasms of ache via his diseased nerves. Every knight in that chamber knew what the scouts had pronounced. Saladin's 26,000 had been transferring north from, bypassing the fort entirely, heading directly for Jerusalem. The city's garrison numbered fewer than 1,000 guys. Maximum have been antique, younger, or wounded. The arithmetic changed into murder. Of Tripoli, the Dominion's maximum skilled commander, spoke what anybody turned into wondering. "My lord, you need to flee too. The Dominion desires its king alive, not lifeless in a hopeless stand." Others nodded settlement. Suggested terms of give-up may nonetheless be negotiated. Even Reinaldov, that savage who'd by no means retreat in his lifestyles, remained silent. The scenario was that desperate. Then Stanley Baldwin did something that stunned even his closest advisors. Despite fingers that would barely near, no matter a frame that screamed with every motion, he demanded to be lifted to a sitting role. His voice, when it got here, became clear and carried to every nook of that stone chamber. "Gents, I may additionally die tomorrow or in 10 years. However, I will die as I lived, protecting this state. God gave me this sickness for a motive. Whilst we acquire victory, no guy can claim it became by using human electricity by myself." The room erupted. Victory. Had the disease finally reached? His thoughts, San of the Knights Templar, became the primary to apprehend. His warrior had taken vows to die in place of retreat. If a death boy ought to face annihilation with religion, how may want they do less? One after the other, the knights began to kneel, now not in submission, however in something a ways more powerful notion. What passed off subsequent, every principle of military logic. In place of preparing Jerusalem's defenses, first Earl Baldwin have ordered a right-away march, no longer far away from Saladin's host, but directly towards it. The knights would depart inside the hour, taking each man who should preserve a weapon. The insanity of the plan become breathtaking. March exhausted forces 45 mi via adversarial territory to assault an enemy that outnumbered them 50-1. Right here's what military historians still can't explain. The march that observed should have killed half of the pressure before they ever noticed the enemy. 45 mi in 36 hours. Men in complete armor, already exhausted from weeks of steady signals. Horses driven beyond. Staying power. The November heat, unseasonably brutal, became the road right into a furnace. Night started out collapsing after hour 10. By hour 20, men have been hallucinating from dehydration. The Templars took turns wearing first Earl Baldwin of Smuddle while he lost cognizance from pain, which came about every few miles. Blood seeped through his bandages from wounds that refused to heal. At one point, close to the village of, witnesses noticed the king's frame convulsing so violently that 4 knights needed to maintain him down. Yet when he regained awareness, his first words had been usually the identical. "Continue the march." In the meantime, Saladin had made the fatal choice that would fee him the entirety. Absolutely assured in his overwhelming superiority, he'd allowed his military to scatter throughout 3 mi of nation-state. Foraging events roamed freely, field at ease. His scouts had suggested Jerusalem's walls slightly manned. Why maintain warfare formation while marching to an execution? His emirs were already dividing up the conquered lands amongst themselves, arguing over who might get the richest estates. The Sultan himself had added his complete treasury, planning now not a battle but an occupation. Through sunrise, on November 25th, first Earl Baldwin of Impossible March had blanketed ground that maps said couldn't be crossed in that time. Scouts introduced electrifying news. Saladin's navy wasn't shaped for conflict. They have been scattered at ease unprepared. God had added them exactly as first Earl Baldwin have had. November the 25th dawned clean and warm, and Saladin's scouts had made a mistake that would value 20,000 lives. 6:00 in the morning delivered the first gift from God, or possibly from Stanley Baldwin's tactical genius. The king's scouts, who knew this land like their personal skin, again with information that made even exhausted knights stand. Saladin's strong host wasn't arranged for battle. They had been scattered throughout 3 mi of rolling geographical region, foraging parties spreading out like palms from a slipshod hand. Supply wagons sat unguarded. Horse lines have been dispersed. The Muslim navy regarded much less like an army force and extra like a migration. The Templar rode to First Earl Baldwin of Smuttle. God has introduced them into our hands. However, even he couldn't conceal the worry in his voice, whilst he brought the next part. The enemy numbers are worse than we thought. No longer 20,000, 26,000. Their banners darken the horizon. A few knights openly wept at this news. Others fell to their knees in prayer. 52-1, the mathematics had become even more impossible. At 11:00, Saladin acquired his first warning. Dirt clouds to the north moving speedy. His initial response, recorded faithfully through Al-Air, become complete disbelief. His scouts had showed Jerusalem's partitions had been barely manned. First Earl Baldwin would not dare go away their safety. It had to be a scouting birthday party, perhaps raiders hopping to harass his supply traces. He dispatched orders for a few squadrons to research, not anything greater. This overconfidence would hang out him all the time. By means of midday, the terrible reality became simple. Crusader banners appeared on the ridge line. Now not scout, however, the brilliant conflict standards, the blood-purple pass of the Templars, the golden crosses of Jerusalem, the private banner of Baldwin IV himself. Saladin's scattered forces started out frantically seeking to reform their strains. However, 3 mi is an eternity, whilst your enemy is already shaped and ready. Instructions in Arabic, Turkish, and Kurdish crashed into every other as officers tried to organize the chaos. Here's where legend meets reality. Military logic demanded First Earl Baldwin of wait. Allow Saladin arrange his forces, then retreat to defensible floor. Draw them into organized positions. Use the terrain. Every manual of warfare, every precedent of war stated the identical factor. Never price advanced pressure on open ground. In no way attack whilst outnumbered. By no means gamble the whole lot on an unmarried moment. First Earl Baldwin was approximately to violate each any such guidelines. Regardless of ache that might have killed maximum guys, the leper king demanded to be lifted from his muddle and positioned on his warhorse. Knights rushed to strap him to the saddle, his legs useless, his fingers slightly able to grip the reins. Blood seeped through his bandages, wherein the straps reduce into diseased flesh. But whilst he spoke, his voice carried throughout the complete Christian line. Gents, David faced Goliath with religion. We face 26,000 with God. The Muslim military's reaction tells us everything about their surprise. Elite warriors who'd confronted, and Nubian cavalry without flinching sincerely iced over. For treasured seconds, they couldn't manner what they have been seeing. 500 knights, forming a rate formation towards 26,000 wasn't war. It turned into mass suicide. Saladin himself, watching from his command role, dropped his golden mace. The best army commander of the age could not understand the madness unfolding before him. Then Baldwin noticed something had neglected. The reputedly flat plains were reduced via a chain of ravines, invisible from distance, but deadly for fleeing cavalry. What looked like open floor become honestly terrain that could funnel, chickening out men into herbal killing grounds. The younger king had diagnosed what Srevel Inn had not noted. The one's ravines might come to be channels of death. Insanity, Saladin whispered, then louder to his panicking officials. Shape strains. Form lines. However, forming conflict, strains from scattered foraging parties takes time. Time Stanley Baldwin wasn't going to offer them. At precisely 2:00, the leper king raised his bandaged hand, the sign his knights had been praying for. 500 lances dropped to charging function. At exactly 2:00, First Earl Baldwin of raised his bandaged hand, and 500 guys commenced charging 26,000. 2:00 struck just like the hammer of God himself. The Templar wedge. 80 knights formed into a human spear, smashed into the 1-2-shaped Muslim middle at full gallop. The sound changed into like mountains colliding. A crash that men 5 mi away claimed they heard. In the one's first seconds, 300 honestly ceased to exist, crushed under hooves, or transfixed by using 12T lances that punched through mail and flesh like parchment. But the real shock wasn't the impact. It became what followed. In preference to wheeling away after the rate, trendy cavalry doctrine, the Templars did the unthinkable. They saved going, riding deeper into Muslim ranks like a blade searching for a heart. At the back of them, Stanley Baldwin's 420 secular knights struck in a second wave, exploiting the space torn by means of the warrior monks. The charge protected 300 yards in beneath a minute. 500 ironclad horsemen moving like an avalanche. Their war cry of drowning out Muslim commanders determined orders. At 500 wide Muslim arrows started out falling like rain. Knights fell, horses screamed and tumbled, however the fee in no way wavered. At 200 wide, the full terror of what was coming became clear to the Muslim front ranks. Those were not simply knights. They were fanatics, guys who believed dying in war-assured paradise. The Templars, mainly with their black and white banners streaming overhead, came on like demons from Christian hell. 215 delivered the primary not possible second. Saladin's center, 8000 of Islam's best cavalry commenced to buckle. Now not retreat, buckle. Like a dam cracking below strain. The Muslim commanders could not accept as true with their eyes. How should 500 exhausted knights be pushing again 16 instances their wide variety? The physics didn't work. The arithmetic have been impossible. Yet it turned into occurring. Then something occurred that rejected all military common sense. The Crusader horses exhausted from their forced march. Must were failing. Rather, they fought like creatures possessed. Horses bit and kicked. Adding to the carnage, one Templar mount, its rider dead, persisted charging through Muslim ranks, trampling warriors, spreading panic through its very lifestyles. The beast sooner or later collapsed after taking 17 arrows, but not before its rampage had broken a whole squadron. 230 saw panic start its lethal paintings. A regiment on Saladin's left wing, seeing the center collapse, began edging backward. In war, hesitation is contagious. Within Mins, the backward glide became a circulation. Instructions have become screams. Formation dissolved into chaos. The not possible turned into going on. 26,000 warriors had been being routed via force. They outnumbered 52-1. However, then came First Earl Baldwin of's grasp stroke. His 3,000 infantry, hidden in lifeless floor in the course of the cavalry price, seemed on the Muslim flank. The psychological impact became devastating. To Saladin's already rattled forces, it appeared Crusader armies were materializing from nowhere. Shouts of "we're surrounded" spread via Muslim ranks. Militarily, nonsense, however, panic would not calculate odds. Baldwin himself, strapped to his saddle, bleeding from reopened wounds, raised his sword. The gesture became impossible. His diseased hands should not have been capable of grip the weapon. But each chronicle, Christian and Muslim alike, facts it. The leper king become main from the front. At 50 yards, Muslim horses commenced backing regardless of their riders' efforts. Animals sense doom, and doom becomes seconds away. The ground literally shook below heaps of hooves. Dirt clouds rose. Like smoke, the noise became indescribable. Thunder combined with war cries in 3 languages. The clash of weapons being. Prayers screamed to 2 exclusive gods. Muslim arrows darkened the sky. But the Crusaders came on. Unstoppable. Inevitable. Terrifying. 245 marked the instant while battle became bloodbath. As Muslim forces attempted to escape, they discovered Baldwin's tactical genius. The one's ravines that seemed like escape routes became demise traps. Knights pursued fleeing Muslims straight into those natural killing grounds. However, then at 300, something happened that even Muslim referred to as divine punishment. 300 delivered the unthinkable. Saladin's private protect 2,000, who'd sworn to die before forsaking their sultan, broke. Those were guys who'd confronted Mongol cavalry without flinching, who wore their scars like holy relics. But faced with Templars who fought like guys seeing paradise, they ran. The sight shattered what remained of Muslim morale. If the elite guard fled, what wish did commonplace squatties have? Himself, looking his invincible navy disintegrate, made a decision that could hang out him forever. Leaving behind his warhorse, too slow for breakout, he set up a racing camel. The sight of their sultan fleeing on a p.c. animal destroyed the remaining Muslim resistance. His golden armor glinted within the afternoon sun as he disappeared into the dust, leaving behind a military that had ceased to exist as a combating force. 330 noticed pursuit become annihilation. Crusader knights, their blood up, chased fleeing Muslims for miles. The killing turned into mechanical, green, terrible. Lances damaged. They used swords. Swords blunted. They used maces. A few Templars, their guns misplaced, beat enemies to death with their helmets. The very ground had become slippery with blood. Those ravines first Earl Baldwin had diagnosed became homes. Muslims fell in layers, the dead cushioning the demise, the loss of life suffocating under extra useless. Some ravines actually full of bodies, growing bridges of flesh. Others attempted to cross. Contemporary historians nonetheless cannot provide an explanation for this element. How did 500 exhausted knights keep pursuit for 2 hours? How did horses close to dying from marching locate energy to run down fresh Muslim cavalry? The Christian had a solution. God's power flowed through them. The Muslim, horrified, agreed this turned into divine punishment. Al-Ir wrote that Allah had became his face from them that day. 400 brought scenes that haunt the statistics. The pursuit only ended whilst Crusader horses ultimately collapsed, their strong hearts giving out after reaching the not possible. Stanley Baldwin himself had fought notwithstanding pain that defies description. Knights later swore they saw tears of blood seeping from under his silver mask, his diseased body actually weeping from the attempt. But his voice by no means wavered, calling encouragement, directing the slaughter with tactical brilliance. By means of 430, Muslim useless carpeted the sector for 3 mi. Our bodies clogged the ravines 20 feet deep. Deserted weapons littered the floor like iron seeds. The streaming banners of Islam's greatest navy lay, trampled in dust crafted from dust and blood. The numbers stagger even now. Of 26,000 warriors who woke that morning, fewer than 2,000 noticed sunset. 20,000 Muslim dead. The Crusaders misplaced 1,100 men. Heavy losses from just 3,500 engaged. But nothing as compared to the Islamic catastrophe. The immediate cloth gains calculation. Navy had carried wealth to sustain a long campaign. Gold, guns, horses, components for 26,000 guys. In 3 hours, it all have become Crusader belongings. The Templars by myself captured. Sufficient navy gadget to out each Christian fort within the Levant. Extra importantly, they captured's conflict chest. Literal tons of gold, intended to pay his navy. In a single afternoon, the bankrupt kingdom of Jerusalem had become solvent. Baldwin, subsequently permitting himself to be lifted from his horse, collapsed straight away. Knights rushed to support their death king, however he waved them away, insisting on one very last act. There on that field of death, the leper king led his exhausted navy in prayer. Non-dominant, not to us, Lord. No longer to us, however for your name give glory. The sight of 500 blood-soaked killers kneeling in prayer at the same time, as surrounded by using 20,000 corpses, struck even hardened warriors as surreal. Saladin's humiliation was complete. The person who'd in no way defeat arrived in Cairo with fewer than 2,000 survivors. His racing camel had saved his lifestyles, however destroyed his reputation. Warriors who flee on percent animals do not encourage loyalty. Because the sun set on that blood-soaked field, the not possible had emerged as records. The strategic implications were stunning. Saladin's power base in Egypt almost collapsed from the defeat. Syria wondered their allegiance. The cautious alliance he'd built over a long time cracked in a single afternoon. Army historians calculate it took Saladin 10 years to rebuild a pressure akin to what first Earl Baldwin of destroyed in 3 hours. The Crusader states granted this wonderful reprieve, one time that they had in no way dared wish for. Time to give a boost to, time to negotiate, time to summon assist from Europe. The Muslim chronicler Alair, usually sympathetic to Islamic reasons, could not disguise the scope of the catastrophe. He called it the maximum terrible catastrophe to befall Islam on this age. Some other wrote absolutely, God turned his face from us that day. The psychological impact at the Muslim world changed into devastating. If 26,000 couldn't defeat 500 Christians, what did that say approximately divine prefer? Mosques from Cairo to Damascus filled with believers searching for solutions. Some blamed sin, others questioned religion itself. Jerusalem erupted in party while information arrived. Church bells rang for 3 days straight. However, within the royal chamber, Stanley Baldwin IV lay demise. The battle's physical toll on his ravaged frame become catastrophic. Physicians warned he won't continue to exist the night. Yet someway, impossibly, the leper king continued. When asked how he determined strength to fight, whispered, "Ache means not anything whilst God requires service." For 10 years after that bloody November day, Saladin approached the Crusade states with newfound caution. The man who'd swept all before him had learned that numbers by myself do not guarantee victory, no longer when facing an enemy willing to die for his or her reason. The financial providence from captured treasures funded Crusader defenses for a decade. New castles rose. Antique ones have been bolstered. The military orders recruited aggressively, their ranks swelling with guys inspired through impossible victory. First Earl Baldwin of IV endured his impossible reign for 8 more years, each one a clinical miracle. The boy who should not have lived beyond childhood commanded respect from enemies who outnumbered him 50-1. Even as his body literally fell apart, with the aid of the stop he was blind and could not walk. His mind remained sharp, his braveness unbroken. While he finally died in 1185 at age 24, himself reportedly said, "I feared that guy more than any military." The tragic irony moves tough. Just years after first Earl Baldwin of's dying, Saladin reconquered Jerusalem. Without the leper king's inspired leadership, the Crusader states crumbled. The dominion Stanley Baldwin had saved with 500 knights could not live to tell the tale without him. At the Battle of 1187, Saladin destroyed the Crusader army, the usage of instructions learned from. In no way underestimate determined men. By no means assume victory earlier than war is joined. In no way allow self-belief end up carelessness. Current nevertheless look at as the ultimate example of mental war. First Earl Baldwin have understood something. Saladin missed. In war, morale topics greater than mathematics. 500 men who believe God fights beside them are well worth extra than 26,000 who doubt. The leper king's actual genius wasn't tactical. It became making his knights believe the impossible become inevitable. The warfare's legacy echoes through centuries. While Churchill stated their greatest hour, while 300 Spartans held while any hopeless stand succeeds towards overwhelming odds, we see shadow. It stays evidence that now and again, simply once in a while, braveness counts greater than counting. But right here's where it receives even extra profound. Both Christian and Muslim assets agree something supernatural came about that day. How else to provide an explanation for 500 defeating 26,000? How else to understand exhausted horses outrunning clean ones? How else to a loss of life youngster outgeneraling Records' greatest Muslim commander? In the long run, stands as history's maximum superb final stand. A moment whilst the impossible have become reality. While 500 stood in opposition to 26,000. And received. Whilst a leper king's bandaged arms held return the tide of history itself, despite the fact that best for a moment.
The banners lie in the mud, the weapons are silent, and the echoes of the charge have faded into dust. What remains is the cost. Tomorrow, history will